Most volcanic eruptions follow a curve. They rise, they peak, they fall. The volcano calms, the cycle ends, most of the time. But there is a volcano in the Philippines called Mayon, the most active volcano in a country full of active volcanoes, and right now its curve is doing something different. For 4 straight months, the activity has been climbing in steps. Each eruption has been bigger than the last. And on May 2nd, the volcano produced its largest event of the cycle so far, sent a wall of pyroclastic flow 4 kilometers down its slope, and showed no sign of winding down. Stay with me, because the pattern we are watching is the same pattern that, 2 centuries ago, killed an entire town, and the curve is still climbing. Let's get into it. At 4:28 in the afternoon, local time, on May 2nd, 2026, a piece of Mayon Volcano broke off and started racing down the mountain. Not a small piece, not a rock. A section of accumulated lava that had been piling up on the upper cone for weeks, sitting on a slope so steep it should have failed days ago, finally let go under its own weight. 22 minutes later, at 4:50 in the afternoon, the volcano started throwing chunks of glowing material out of its crater in short, violent bursts. And then at 5:38, exactly 1 hour and 10 minutes after that initial collapse, the slope failed for real. Multiple pyroclastic density currents went down the southwestern flank of Mayon Volcano in the Philippines. The longest one traveled about 4 kilometers. That is 2.5 miles of superheated gas, ash, pumice, and volcanic rock, moving as a ground-hugging fluid down a channel called the Mi-Isi Gully. By the time the sun set over Albay province, 52 villages had been hit by ashfall. More than 5,000 people were sheltering in evacuation centers. And the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, the agency that watches this volcano 24 hours a day, was holding the alert level at 3 out of 5 and refusing to let anyone back inside the 6-kilometer permanent danger zone. That is the headline. That is what made the news. But here is the part that did not make the news, and the part that this video is actually about. The May 2nd paroxysm is not the start of something. The volcano has been escalating, in clear and measurable steps, for 4 months. It started erupting on January 6th, 2026. It has not stopped since. And the curve of activity, when you actually plot it out, is not flat. It is not random. It is climbing. Every major intensification has sat at a higher level than the one before it. The May 2nd event is just the highest level so far. Now, that does not necessarily mean the volcano is going to do something catastrophic. Stratovolcanoes do not always announce their largest eruptions. Sometimes they just peak and wind down. But sometimes the 4-month escalation is the precursor sequence. Sometimes the slope collapse is the warning shot. And sometimes the volcano you are watching is the same volcano that, in 1814, buried a town under 30 feet of ash, killed roughly 1,200 people in a single afternoon, and helped send the entire northern hemisphere into a year without a summer the next year. Mayon is the most active volcano in the Philippines. The Philippines sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, which contains roughly 75% of the world's active volcanoes. And what is happening on this mountain right now, this week, this month, is something that the experts who watch it cannot, today, tell you the ending of. They have kept the alert level at 3. They have kept 5,000 people out of their homes. And they are watching, very closely, to see whether the May 2nd event was the peak of this cycle, or whether it was the opening movement of something much, much bigger. The honest answer is that nobody knows yet. The slightly less honest, but more interesting answer is that we have seen this exact pattern before, and the last time we saw it, it did not end well at all. So let me show you what is happening on this mountain, and let me show you, in numbers and in history, why a quiet stratovolcano in the southeastern Philippines is, right now, one of the most important things on this planet to be watching. Mayon Volcano sits in Albay province, on the island of Luzon in the southeastern Philippines. It is 2,463 meters tall. That is about 8,081 feet. Its coordinates are 13.257 degrees north and 123.685 degrees east. It is, by almost universal agreement, the most photographed volcano in the world. Photographers go there because Mayon looks fake. The cone is steep, symmetrical, almost impossibly perfect. From a distance, it looks like somebody drew it. The locals call it the perfect cone. Tourist boards in Albay call it the perfect cone. National Geographic photographers, when they want a stock image of a volcano that looks the way a volcano is supposed to look, fly to Mayon. The shape is so flawless that it has been used in textbooks for over a century as the canonical illustration of what a stratovolcano is supposed to be. Here is the problem. The thing that makes Mayon look perfect is also the thing that makes it dangerous. Volcanoes come in a few different architectural classes, and the architecture controls the hazard profile. There is one class called shield volcanoes. Those are the wide, gentle, almost flat-looking volcanoes you see in Hawaii. Mauna Loa is a shield volcano. Kilauea is a shield volcano. Most of the islands in Hawaii are made out of shield volcanoes. They erupt frequently, but the eruptions are usually slow. The lava is thin and runny. It oozes out of the volcano like syrup, and it flows downhill at walking pace. People can outrun shield volcano lava. They have to walk fast, but they can do it. Mayon is not a shield volcano. Mayon is a stratovolcano. So is Vesuvius, which destroyed Pompeii. So is Mount St. Helens, which exploded in 1980. So is Pinatubo, which went off in 1991. So is Mount Fuji. So was Krakatoa in 1883 and Tambora in 1815. The pattern is starting to come into focus, isn't it? The volcanoes that have killed the most people in human history are almost all stratovolcanoes. A stratovolcano is built out of layers: lava, then ash, then broken rock, then more lava, then more ash, stacked up over thousands of years until they form that beautiful cone shape. But the same architecture that creates the beautiful cone is what creates the danger. The magma inside is sticky. It is more viscous than shield volcano magma, so instead of letting gas escape, it traps the gas inside. Pressure builds. The cone itself is steep, sometimes 35 or 40 degrees, which means anything erupted at the top has nowhere to go but down, and gravity does not forgive. And the walls of the cone are not solid rock. They are layered ash and rubble loosely cemented by old lava flows. They are, structurally, a composite mess. When a stratovolcano fails, it does not produce a slow lava flow. It produces an explosion, or a column collapse, or a pyroclastic density current, or, in the worst cases, a sector collapse, where an entire flank of the mountain just lets go and slides downhill in a single catastrophic event. That is what happened at Mount St. Helens in 1980. The whole north flank of the mountain bulged out, became unstable, and finally failed in a lateral blast that flattened forests for miles. Mayon's perfect cone is the warning. It is steep because the magma is sticky. It is symmetrical because the eruptions have been frequent enough to keep filling in the gaps. And it is famous because it is the textbook example of a class of mountain that, when it goes badly, kills people in numbers that are hard to comprehend. So when you see the postcards of the perfect Mayon cone, when you see those tourists posing in front of it from 20 kilometers away, what you are actually looking at is a structurally weak, composite mountain full of viscous gas-charged magma, sitting on top of a subduction zone in one of the most tectonically active regions on Earth. And right now, that mountain is in its 5th month of continuous magmatic eruption. Which brings us to the gullies, and to the question of which villages are actually in the line of fire. Here is something most people do not understand about volcanoes. The hazard zone around a volcano is not a circle. It looks like a circle on a map, because map makers draw a circle. The Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology drew a 6-kilometer circle around Mayon and called it the permanent danger zone. That circle exists to keep things simple for evacuation planning. But the actual danger from this volcano does not radiate outward in a perfect 360-degree pattern. It follows the channels. Mayon has 3 main gullies on its southern and southwestern flank. They are called Basud, Bonga, and Mi-Isi. A gully, in volcano terms, is a long furrow cut down the side of the cone, carved over years by previous lava flows and rock falls. These gullies act like channels, or more accurately, like the lanes on a slip and slide. Whatever erupts at the top of the volcano, whether that is lava, or pyroclastic flows, or rock falls, or eventually mud flows, will preferentially travel down these channels. The gullies are where the energy goes. As of May 3rd, lava on Mayon has reached 3.8 kilometers down the Basud Gully. That is 2.4 miles. It has reached 3.2 kilometers down the Bonga Gully. That is 2 miles. And it has reached 1.6 kilometers down the Mayon Gully, which is 1 mile. The Mayon Gully was also the channel for the May 2nd pyroclastic density current, which traveled about 4 kilometers along that same drainage. So while one neighborhood near Mayon might be relatively safe, another neighborhood on the wrong flank, downhill from the wrong gully, can be in serious trouble even if it sits at the same straight line distance from the summit. This is what asymmetry means in volcanic hazard analysis. The May 2nd event sent ash plumes drifting to the southwest because the prevailing winds in May pushed the ash that direction. 3 municipalities took the brunt of it: Kamalig, Ginobatan, Ligao City. Those are the towns sitting downwind, downslope from the active gullies. The Office of Civil Defense, which is the agency coordinating the response, has confirmed that 52 barangays, which is the local term for villages, were affected by ashfall. 18 of those villages are in Ginobatan, 17 are in Kamalig, 17 are in Ligao City. The northeast flank of the volcano, by contrast, has been comparatively quiet. Same volcano. Same eruption. Wildly different exposure depending on which side of the mountain you happen to live on. And here's where it gets worse. Volcanic ash is not soft. People hear the word ash and they picture campfire ash, that fluffy gray stuff that you can blow off your hand. Volcanic ash is something else entirely. It is microscopic fragments of pulverized rock and volcanic glass with sharp angular edges. Imagine if somebody took a wine bottle and ground it into dust so fine you could inhale it. That is what is falling on these villages right now. It cuts your lungs. It cuts your eyes. It contaminates open water sources because it carries fluoride and sulfate compounds that change the chemistry of whatever it lands in. It kills aircraft engines, which is why all flights into the region have been suspended. It clogs car engines and abrades moving parts. It coats roofs, and when it gets wet, it gets heavy. A 4-inch layer of wet volcanic ash can exceed the design load of many tropical roof structures, which is part of why so many homes in the Philippines collapse during eruptions, even when the lava never reaches them. The 5,000 people in evacuation centers right now are not there as a precaution against something that might happen. They are there because their homes are uninhabitable, because their water is contaminated, because the air outside their front doors is, in some places, literally cutting into their lung tissue with every breath. And on top of that, there is a second-order danger that has not even started yet. It is called a lahar. We are going to get to that one a little later in this video, because it gets bad. But first, we need to talk about how this eruption started, because the May 2nd paroxysm did not happen in a vacuum. It is the highest peak in a 4-month escalation, and the shape of that escalation is, in my opinion, the single most important fact about what Mayon is doing right now. So, let me take you back to the first week of January. On January 1st, 2026, at 6 in the morning local time, the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology raised the alert level at Mayon from 1 to 2. That was the first sign anything was wrong. Alert level 2, on their 0 to 5 scale, means moderate unrest. It means the volcano has begun showing signs of magmatic activity beneath the surface. They issued the standard warning. Stay outside the 6-kilometer permanent danger zone. Avoid the slopes. Watch for ashfall. 5 days later, on January 6th, the volcano began erupting. Lava came out of the summit crater. The eruption was non-explosive, what volcanologists call effusive, which means the magma was reaching the surface and flowing downhill rather than blowing up in a violent column. PHIVOLCS raised the alert level higher. The mandatory evacuation of the closest barangays began, and the agency in its public update used a phrase that, looking back, told you exactly what was going to happen. They said the volcano had entered, quote, a period of magmatic eruption. That phrase matters. A period of magmatic eruption is not the same thing as a single eruption. It does not mean a one-off event. It means the volcano has woken up, and the system is open, and material is going to keep coming out of it for some indefinite duration. It is the difference between somebody saying I sneezed once and somebody saying I have the flu. The first is a moment. The second is a process. And the process at Mayon is now into its 5th consecutive month with no end in sight. Through the rest of January, between the 11th and the 21st, PHIVOLCS reported that the eruption was characterized by lava effusion, summit dome collapses, pyroclastic density currents, rockfalls, ash plumes, and what they called avalanches of incandescent material. That last phrase deserves a moment. Avalanches of incandescent material means glowing red-hot rock breaking off the upper part of the volcano and tumbling down the slope at high speed, generating its own heat, sometimes catching fire to the vegetation it lands on. This was already happening in January. The seismic data showed rising rockfall counts and rising pyroclastic flow counts, both of which are technical proxies for, quote, a higher effusion rate. In English, that means the volcano was producing more lava per day than it had been the week before. On February 9th, just over a month into the eruption, the volcano had its first major intensification. There was a significant pyroclastic density current event, the largest of the cycle to that point. Not as large as what would come on May 2nd, but enough that Phyvolcs publicly characterized it as a brief intensification of unrest. The system was not just running at a steady level, it was stepping up. And then, through April, the seismic data tells the real story. During the week of April 2nd through April 8th, Phyvolcs recorded between 217 and 356 rockfalls per day, between 0 and 12 pyroclastic density currents per day, between 32 and 159 volcanic earthquakes per day, and between 1 and 19 episodes of volcanic tremor per day. Those numbers are not normal background. Those numbers are an active eruption running at a high tempo. And the rockfall count, in particular, is the number to watch, because rockfalls are caused by accumulated lava becoming unstable on the upper cone. 200 to 300 rockfalls a day means there is a lot of material piling up in places it should not be. So when the lava finally collapsed on May 2nd, that was not a sudden surprise event. The volcano had been telling everyone it was going to do that for weeks. The seismic instruments had been counting the rockfalls. The cameras had been watching the dome get bigger. The thermal satellites had been showing more and more heat. The escalation was visible in the data, in real time, the entire time. The May 2nd event was the prediction coming true. The question now is whether the prediction was specifically about May 2nd, or whether May 2nd is just the latest data point on a curve that is still climbing. And to answer that, we need to talk about the satellite record, and about a particular kind of pattern that, when you see it on a stratovolcano, is the kind of pattern that makes volcanologists stop sleeping at night. If you pull up the satellite-based thermal monitoring record for Mayon Volcano, going back through 2024 and 2025, you will see almost nothing. Flat lines, background noise. The volcano had been quiet. There were occasional minor anomalies, the kind of small heat signatures that any active volcano produces just by existing, but nothing that would have made anybody worried. Through all of 2025, Mayon was, by satellite metrics, asleep. Then the record changes. Right at the turn of the year, late January 2026, you start seeing high radiance pixels, which is the technical term for thermal anomalies, appearing consistently in the imagery. They do not show up once and disappear. They show up and they stay. By February, the thermal pixels are bright enough that the satellite is now picking up Mayon as one of the more active volcanoes in the entire Pacific Basin. By March, the activity is sustained. By April, it is escalating. And by May 2nd, the day of the paroxysm, Mayon is putting out the kind of thermal signature that, for this specific volcano, is essentially unprecedented in the modern satellite era. But here's the part that matters. The curve is not flat with random spikes. It is stepwise. Each major intensification, the January 6th onset, the February 9th first major pyroclastic flow, the mid-April ashfall escalation, and now the May 2nd paroxysm, sits at a higher level than the one before. If you drew a line through the peaks, it would not be horizontal. It would be sloping upward. Every step up is bigger than the last. This is not how Mayon normally behaves. Mayon's standard eruptive cycle, going back decades, looks like a several-week to several-month event followed by years of repose. The volcano produces what volcanologists call Vulcanian strombolian sequences, which is a fancy way of saying mid-sized explosive eruptions every 3 to 5 years on average. It has done this for centuries. The cycle has a shape to it. It rises, it peaks, it falls, and then the volcano goes quiet for a few years until the next cycle. The 2026 cycle does not look like that. 5 months in, with no return to baseline, with no de-escalation, with the largest single event of the cycle happening just yesterday on May 2nd, this is not the standard Mayon pattern. The volcano is doing something different, And the longer it keeps doing that something different, the more legitimate it becomes to ask whether what we are seeing is a precursor sequence rather than a normal cycle. A precursor sequence, in volcanological terms, is the buildup of activity that precedes a major eruption. Stratovolcanoes that produce big eruptions almost always show some kind of precursor pattern. Increasing seismicity, increasing thermal output, increasing gas emissions, particularly sulfur dioxide, increasing surface deformation, where the volcano actually inflates physically as magma chambers fill from below, and, critically, the production of repeated smaller events that step up in intensity over time. If the sequence is a precursor, the smaller events are dress rehearsals. Mayon is hitting most of those criteria right now. The seismicity is up, the thermal output is up. The volcano is producing a steady stream of smaller events that have been getting bigger. The May 2nd pyroclastic density current is the largest of the cycle, but it is not, mechanically, a special event. It is the same kind of slope collapse mechanism that produced the smaller pyroclastic flows in January and February. It is just the biggest version of that mechanism that the cycle has produced so far. The question, the only question that actually matters, is whether the next event is going to be smaller or larger than May 2nd. If it is smaller, the cycle is winding down, and we are watching the peak in the rearview mirror. If it is larger, we are watching a precursor sequence in real time, and the main event has not happened yet. And if you look at the curve, if you look at the 4-month trajectory, and the lack of de-escalation, and the way each step up has been bigger than the last, the curve is not bending downward. Not yet. The curve is still climbing. That brings us to a mechanism that I have not fully explained yet, because the May 2nd event was generated by something specific. It was caused by a lava collapse on the upper cone. And the lava collapse mechanism is exactly the kind of mechanism that can scale up dramatically if the conditions are right. So let me show you what that looks like, and let me show you what the worst-case version of that mechanism has done in the historical record. Imagine, for a moment, what is happening right now on the upper part of Mayon Volcano. Lava is being erupted from the summit crater more or less continuously. It is hot, but it is also viscous, which is the technical term for sticky. It does not flow easily. So instead of running smoothly down the slope, it piles up. A dome forms near the summit. The dome grows. As more lava is erupted from below, the dome gets bigger and taller. And this is happening on a slope that, near the summit, approaches 40 degrees of inclination. Now ask yourself a basic question. What happens when you keep piling sticky material on top of a 40-degree slope? The answer is that the pile becomes mechanically unstable. Eventually, gravity wins. A piece breaks off. It falls. And here is where it gets ugly. The piece that breaks off is not cool, inert rock. It is fresh lava. It is full of dissolved gas. It is hot enough that the moment it starts breaking apart, the gas trapped inside it expands violently. The falling piece fragments on the way down, releases its gas, mixes with hot air and ash from the surrounding plume, and converts into what volcanologists call a pyroclastic density current. That is what happened at Mayon at 5:38 in the afternoon on May 2nd. A chunk of accumulated lava, sitting on a 40-degree slope at the summit, lost its grip. It fell. As it fell, it tore itself apart. The gas inside it expanded. It swept up loose ash and debris from the slope it was traveling down. And by the time the resulting flow reached the bottom of the Mi-Isi Gully, 4 kilometers later, it was a churning ground-hugging cloud of 200 to 1,000 degrees Celsius gas, ash, pumice, and rock fragments, moving fast enough that nothing alive that got caught in it survived. That is the mechanism. Now here is the scary part. That same mechanism, scaled up, is responsible for some of the worst volcanic disasters in human history. In 1980, on May 18th, the entire north flank of Mount St. Helens in Washington state did this exact thing, except that, instead of a small piece of lava breaking off, the whole flank of the mountain failed. The bulge that had been growing on the north side for months finally collapsed in a sector failure, and the resulting lateral blast flattened 230 square miles of forest. 57 people died. The mountain lost about 1,300 feet of elevation in a single morning. In 1902, on May 8th, on the Caribbean island of Martinique, a pyroclastic density current generated by a similar collapse came down off Mount Pelee and into the city of Saint-Pierre. The city had 30,000 people in it. The flow reached the city in less than a minute. It killed approximately 29,000 of them. 2 survived in the immediate downtown core. 1 was a prisoner in an underground cell with thick stone walls. The other was a shoemaker in the basement of a building. Everyone else was either burned to death by the heat, suffocated by the gas, or killed by the mechanical impact of the flow itself. St. Pierre was, before that morning, called the Paris of the Caribbean. It is now a footnote. And in 79 of the Common Era, on August 24th, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius produced a series of pyroclastic density currents that buried Pompeii and Herculaneum on the Bay of Naples. The casts of the victims, the famous plaster casts that you have probably seen pictures of, do not show people who suffocated slowly. They show people who died instantaneously. Modern forensic analysis of the skeletons indicates that the temperature of the gas was high enough, somewhere above 500 degrees Celsius in some locations, that body water vaporized in milliseconds. Death was effectively instant. The bodies were preserved in the position they were in at the moment the heat hit. I am telling you this not to scare you. I am telling you this because the May 2nd pyroclastic density current at Mayon was, mechanically, the same kind of event as the ones at St. Helens and Pili and Pompeii. It was just smaller. It was a cousin. The flow stayed on the volcano. It did not reach a populated area. The 6-kilometer permanent danger zone, which was originally calibrated against historical Mayon flow distances, did its job. But the mechanism that produced the May 2nd event is the same mechanism that, scaled up, produces the events that kill cities. And the lava is still piling up at the top of Mayon right now, on those same 40-degree slopes, in those same gullies, with the same gas content. The slope failure on May 2nd relieved some pressure. It did not relieve all of it. Whatever was unstable up there, more is being added every day. The next collapse is coming. The only question is how big it is going to be. So how big could it actually get? To answer that, we have to do something a little uncomfortable. We have to talk about what this exact volcano did, on this exact slope, 212 years ago. On February 1st, 1814, the morning was ordinary in the town of Cagsawa. Cagsawa was a small Spanish colonial town in Albay province, sitting at the foot of Mayon Volcano. It was a farming community, mostly, with a Catholic church at its center. The church had a bell tower. The bell tower was made of stone and brick and stood several stories high. It was, in 19th century terms, the tallest structure for miles around. Sometime during that day, Mayon Volcano produced what volcanologists now classify as a volcanic explosivity index for eruption. The exact number depends on which historical source you trust, but the eruption sent a sustained ash column up into the atmosphere to an altitude of approximately 50 kilometers. 50 kilometers, just to give you a sense of what that means, is well above the boundary between the troposphere and the stratosphere. The ash was injected into the stratosphere, which means it got above the weather, into the layer of the atmosphere where things stay for years. What came back down was tephra. Tephra is the technical word for everything a volcano throws out, all of it, from microscopic ash to fist-sized pumice to boulder-sized blocks. It came down on Cagsawa in waves. It came down hot. It came down so heavy that it accumulated in the proximate areas to a depth of approximately 9 meters. That is 30 feet of ash and rock, piling up on roofs, on streets, on people. Most of the town was buried within hours. The death toll, as best as we can reconstruct it, is around 1,200 people. PHIVOLCS, the Philippine Volcanology Agency, lists it as the most lethal Mayon eruption on record. Some historical sources cite numbers as high as 2,000. The variation reflects the fact that this happened in 1814 in a Spanish colonial backwater with no modern record keeping. We will probably never know the exact number. What we know is that an entire community was buried alive. The bodies were not recovered. They are still under the volcanic deposits today, 2 centuries later, somewhere in the layer of 19th century debris that sits between the modern soil surface and the older bedrock. The bell tower of the Cagsawa church was the tallest thing in town. It survived the eruption. It stood there, after everything around it was gone, sticking up above 30 feet of ash, a single stone finger pointing at the sky. You can go see it today. It is still there. It is the centerpiece of the Cagsawa Ruins Park, which is one of the most popular tourist destinations in Albay province. The Philippine National Museum has a branch there now. Tourists pose for photos in front of the broken stones. The bell tower is the only physical thing that survived intact from a town that, on January 31st, 1814, had 1,000 people living their lives in it, and on February 2nd had nothing. I want you to sit with that for a moment. I want you to picture the bell tower the way it stands today, with the modern volcano behind it, that perfect cone looking exactly the way it looked the morning of the eruption. The same shape, the same slopes, the same gullies. Mayon Volcano in 2026 is, geologically, the same volcano it was in 1814. It has the same magma source. It has the same tectonic setting. It is fed by the same subducting plate. And it has the same architectural fragility, the same steep cone, the same composite walls, the same propensity to fail catastrophically when conditions align. The eruption that buried Kagsawa was a volcanic explosivity index 4 event. The current eruption, as of May 3rd, 2026, is sitting at a volcanic explosivity index of 2, possibly low 3. That means the current eruption is, in raw energy terms, roughly 10 to 100 times smaller than the eruption that buried the town, which is great news. Except that the difference between a volcanic explosivity index 2 and a volcanic explosivity index 4 is, in the right conditions, a matter of weeks of escalation, not a matter of years. Eruptions can step up. They have stepped up before. And the conditions on Mayon right now, the 4-month sustained magmatic eruption, the climbing thermal curve, the stepwise increase in event size, the visible accumulation of lava on the upper cone, are not the conditions of a volcano winding down. I do not want to scare anyone. I do not want to predict a catastrophe. But I do want to be honest with you. The eruption that killed Kagsawa happened on this exact mountain. The mechanism, the slope collapse generated pyroclastic flow, is the exact mechanism that just happened on May 2nd, except smaller. And the warning that the local Albay communities have been given by their own monitoring agency, the warning to stay inside the evacuation centers, the warning to stay outside the 6-kilometer permanent danger zone, is a warning that was written, in part, with 1814 in mind. The bell tower at Kagsawa is, in a very literal sense, what it looks like when this volcano gets unlucky. Now let me tell you something about that 1814 eruption that almost nobody mentions, because it is not just a Philippine story. It is a global one, and it leads directly into one of the strangest years in the entire historical record of human civilization. 1814 was a bad year for Mayon. 1815 was a worse year, but for a different volcano. On April 10th, 1815, on the island of Sumbawa, in what is now Indonesia, Mount Tambora erupted. The eruption was a volcanic explosivity index, 7. It was the largest volcanic eruption anywhere on Earth in the last 2,000 years. It ejected somewhere between 37 and 45 cubic kilometers of dense rock equivalent material into the atmosphere. It is the most recent confirmed volcanic explosivity index 7 event in human history. Tambora's ash column reached high into the stratosphere, just like Mayon's had the year before. The sulfur dioxide gas in the eruption converted, over a period of weeks, into sulfate aerosol particles. Those particles formed a layer high in the stratosphere that circled the entire globe. The layer reflected sunlight back into space. Less sunlight reached the surface of the Earth. And the global average temperature, in the northern hemisphere especially, dropped. 1816 is now known as the year without a summer. In New England, snow fell in June. Frost killed crops in July. The growing season was cut short by months. Farmers in Vermont and Massachusetts and upstate New York lost most of what they had planted. Food prices doubled. Livestock died. People starved. In the Atlantic provinces of Canada, the cold was so bad that the standard farming calendar was unworkable for 2 consecutive seasons. In Europe, the cold and the rain combined to ruin harvests across France, Germany, the British Isles, and Switzerland. There was widespread famine. Bread riots broke out in multiple European cities. The Irish potato crop failed. So did the wheat harvest in much of Central Europe. In China, the rice crop failed in the south. The Yunnan province had a famine that killed an unknown but very large number of people. The summer monsoon was disrupted. Frost killed rice paddies that had never seen frost in living memory. In India, the monsoon failure contributed to a cholera outbreak that eventually killed millions across Asia. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein in the summer of 1816, sitting indoors in Switzerland because the weather was too miserable to go outside. Lord Byron wrote a poem called Darkness about the experience. He wrote, "The bright sun was extinguished, and the stars did wander darkling in the eternal space, rayless and pathless, and the icy earth swung blind and blackening in the moonless air." He was describing what the sky actually looked like. The atmosphere was so loaded with stratospheric aerosols that sunsets were red for a year. Painters of the period started painting unusually colorful skies, and art historians can now use those paintings as proxy data for atmospheric volcanic loading. 1816 is the most dramatic single year of climate disruption in modern human history, and the dominant cause of it was the eruption of Tambora, 8,000 miles from where most of the famine and cold actually hit. But here is the part that almost nobody talks about. The eruption of Mayon Volcano in 1814, the year before, is believed to have contributed measurably to the overall stratospheric aerosol loading that made 1816 as bad as it was. Two stratospheric volcanic eruptions in the tropics, in close succession, stacked their effects. The Mayon eruption, on its own, would not have caused a year without a summer, but it preloaded the stratosphere. And then Tambora landed on top of it, and the climate of the entire planet broke for a year. Now, the current 2026 Mayon eruption is, as I said, a volcanic explosivity index 2 right now. It is not 1814 yet. It is not Tambora. It is not even at the level where it would inject any significant material into the stratosphere. So none of this, today, is a global threat. It is a local catastrophe in the making, but it is local. Here is the warning. The volcano that contributed to the worst climate event in modern history is the volcano that is, right now, in its 5th month of escalating magmatic eruption, with its thermal output curve still climbing, with the May 2nd event being the biggest of the cycle so far, with no de-escalation visible in any of the data. If the cycle peaks here, we get a localized disaster. If the cycle climbs to a volcanic explosivity index 4, like 1814, we get a regional catastrophe and probably a measurable climate signal. And if the cycle climbs further into volcanic explosivity index 5 or 6 territory, we are in genuinely uncharted territory for this volcano in the recorded period. The probability of that last scenario is low. I want to be clear about that. The base rates do not favor it. Mayon has never produced a volcanic explosivity index 5 or higher event in the recorded period. But the probability is not 0. The probability cannot be 0, because the volcano has surprised everyone every time it has caught the world's attention. And the curve, again, is still climbing. So let me show you what the upper end of that scale actually looks like, because there are 2 more eruptions I have to tell you about, and they are both modern, both well documented, and both very recent. Volcanologists rate eruptions on something called the Volcanic Explosivity Index, abbreviated as Volcanic Explosivity Index, on a scale from 0 to 8. The scale is logarithmic, which is the same kind of math you see in earthquake magnitudes. Each step up represents roughly a 10-fold increase in the volume of material ejected by the eruption. So a Volcanic Explosivity Index 2 is 10 times bigger than a 1. A 3 is 10 times bigger than a 2. And by the time you get to 7 or 8, you are looking at events that are millions of times larger than the Strombolian bursts that Mayon produces during normal activity. A Volcanic Explosivity Index 2 is a Strombolian eruption. That is what Mayon is currently doing. It is a small eruption. It is dangerous on a local scale, but it is not historically remarkable. A Volcanic Explosivity Index 3 is a Vulcanian eruption. That is also routine for Mayon. The volcano produces several events at this level per century. The May 2nd paroxysm, depending on how you measure the energy released, may have nudged into the low Volcanic Explosivity Index 3 range. So we are already, right now, at the edge of that level. A Volcanic Explosivity Index 4 is a subplinian eruption. 1814 at Mayon was at this level. So was Mount St. Helens in 1980. So was Eyjafjallajökull in 2010. The Icelandic volcano that grounded transatlantic flights for a week. Globally, the average frequency of a Volcanic Explosivity Index 4 is about once per decade. They are not rare. They kill people. They cost billions. But they happen. A Volcanic Explosivity Index 5 is a Plinian eruption. That is, Vesuvius in 79 of the Common Era, the eruption that destroyed Pompeii. That is also Mount St. Helens, by some estimates, depending on how you classify the energy components. Frequency of volcanic explosivity index 5 eruptions is roughly once per century, globally. A volcanic explosivity index 6 is a colossal eruption. The most recent one was Mount Pinatubo in 1991. Pinatubo is in the same country as Mayon. It is on the same island, Luzon. It is about 200 miles to the north. The Pinatubo eruption injected about 17 megatons of sulfur dioxide gas into the stratosphere. The resulting sulfate aerosol layer caused approximately 1/2 of 1 degree Celsius of global cooling for about 12 months. Crops were affected worldwide. Weather patterns shifted. Pinatubo is, by most measurements, the most studied volcanic eruption in history because it happened during the modern satellite era and we got the kind of data that we never had before. Volcanic explosivity index. 6 eruptions happen, on average, once or twice per century. The last one before Pinatubo was Krakatoa in 1883. The volcano blew itself apart, generated tsunamis that killed 36,000 people on the surrounding coastlines, and the explosion was heard 3,000 miles away in Australia. People in Perth heard the eruption of Krakatoa, 3,000 miles, through air. The sound waves circled the planet several times before fading out completely. A volcanic explosivity index 7 is super colossal. Tambora, in 1815, the year without a summer eruption, was a volcanic explosivity index 7. It is the most recent confirmed event at this level. Frequency is roughly once every 500 to 1,000 years. And a volcanic explosivity index 8, megacolossal, is the kind of event that produces a supervolcano caldera. Yellowstone has done this 3 times in the last 2 million years. The most recent VEI 8, Toba, was about 74,000 years ago in what is now Indonesia, and there is genetic evidence in modern human populations that the resulting climate disruption nearly drove our species extinct. We are descended possibly from the survivors of a volcanic genetic bottleneck. Now, where does Mayon's current eruption sit on this scale? As I said, it is a volcanic explosivity index 2, possibly nudging into a low volcanic explosivity index 3 on May 2nd. The probability that the current cycle climbs all the way up to a volcanic explosivity index 6 or 7 is, by every base rate I can find, very low. I cannot tell you it is 0, because no statistical statement about a system like this can be 0, but it is low. The most likely outcome of the current cycle is that the volcano peaks somewhere in the volcanic explosivity index 3 to 4 range, and then winds down over the following weeks or months. Here is what I cannot tell you. I cannot tell you that this is going to be the most likely outcome. I can tell you it is the most likely outcome, given the base rates, given the volcano's history, given the fact that Mayon has never produced a volcanic explosivity index 5 or higher in the recorded period. But base rates are not destiny. The volcano is doing something unusual right now. The escalation curve is unusual. The duration of the eruption is unusual. The mechanism, the sustained slope collapse production of pyroclastic flows, is unusual. None of these unusual signals tell you, on their own, that something larger is coming. But all of them together raise the probability above where it would normally sit. If Mayon does climb to a volcanic explosivity index 4, like 1814, the consequences are regional. People die. The Bicol region of the Philippines, which is one of the poorest parts of an already poor country, experiences a multi-year recovery from a disaster on the scale of the 1814 Cagsawa burial. There is some measurable climate signal globally, but probably nothing dramatic. If Mayon, somehow, climbs to a volcanic explosivity index 5 or 6 in this cycle, then we are looking at something I cannot fully predict. We have no historical precedent for Mayon at that scale. We would be writing the playbook in real time. The local consequences would be civilizational for the Philippines. The global consequences would depend on stratospheric injection, atmospheric dynamics, latitude, and a lot of other variables. But the floor would be measurable global cooling, like Pinatubo. The ceiling, in a worst-case scenario, would be something approaching another year without a summer. I am not predicting any of this. I am telling you what the scale looks like, so that when I tell you the volcano's escalation curve is still climbing, you understand exactly what is at stake at every rung of the ladder it could keep climbing. Because there are a few more things you need to know before I let you go. there is a second-order hazard that has not even started yet. There are a set of conspiracy theories that are already going viral online about this eruption, and we should address them honestly. And there is the question, the only question that really matters, of what the experts who watch this volcano think is actually going to happen. Let me get into all three. Whenever a volcano erupts in 2026, the conspiracy ecosystem around volcanic activity goes into overdrive within hours. Mayon is no exception. Within 12 hours of the May 2nd paroxysm, there were posts circulating on every social platform claiming that the eruption was caused by the High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, HAARP, the radio research facility in Gakona, Alaska. There were posts claiming that the eruption is being deliberately suppressed by Western media for some unspecified reason. There were posts claiming the eruption was triggered by a solar event, or by some kind of synchronized ring of fire activation, or, in the more colorful corners of the internet, by ancient knowledge about Mayon that has been hidden for centuries by colonial powers. I want to address these honestly, because the audience for this channel is intelligent enough to engage with the actual claims rather than just dismissing them. So, let us take them one at a time, and let the physics do the work. The HAARP claim is the most common one, and the easiest to debunk. HAARP, the facility in Alaska, transmits radio frequency energy into the upper atmosphere to study the ionosphere. The transmitter operates at a maximum power of about 3.6 megawatts. That is the technical specification. The total energy that HAARP could deliver in a full day of continuous operation, which it never actually does, because that would burn out the equipment, is on the order of 3 × 10 to the 11th joules. The energy required to produce a single volcanic explosivity index 3 eruption, the level Mayon is at right now, is on the order of 10 to the 15th joules. That is 4 orders of magnitude more energy than HAARP could possibly deliver. And HAARP's energy is deposited in the ionosphere, which is more than 100 kilometers above the surface of the Earth, while Mayon's magma chamber is roughly 5 kilometers below the surface. There is no known physical mechanism by which radio frequency energy in the ionosphere can couple to a magma chamber kilometers underground. The energy budget does not work, and the geometry does not work. The 77 expert geoscience survey published by Shearer and colleagues in 2016 in Environmental Research Letters found no credible scientific support for any HAARP volcano coupling at all. The framework is ruled out by basic physics. The suppression claim is more interesting because there is a real grain of truth inside it. Western media coverage of Pacific Island disasters is, demonstrably, lighter than coverage of comparable European or North American events. Mayon's escalation through the early months of 2026 received almost no coverage in mainstream Western media until the May 2nd paroxysm forced their hand. So the perception that the story is being underreported is, for what it is worth, accurate. But the explanation is structural neglect, not deliberate suppression. Western newsrooms do not staff Pacific disaster coverage at the level the events warrant. The result looks like suppression, and feels like suppression, but it is just the natural outcome of editorial priorities that have been baked into the news industry for decades. There is no smoking gun. There is just a pattern of inattention that produces the same effect that suppression would. The solar trigger claim is more nuanced. The general idea is that solar activity, particularly coronal mass ejections and proton events, can affect the geophysical state of the Earth in ways that influence seismic and volcanic activity. The most cited paper in this space is Marcatelli and colleagues, published in Scientific Reports in 2020, which found a statistical correlation between solar proton flux and the timing of large earthquakes. The proposed mechanism, if real, would involve solar wind perturbing the magnetosphere, inducing currents in the Earth's crust, and modifying the stress state in fault zones. The correlation is debated. Replication attempts have produced mixed results. For the May 2nd Mayon event, the relevant question is whether there was any meaningful solar driver. The answer is no. The space weather conditions during the event were quiet. There was no Earth-directed coronal mass ejection in the 72 hours before the eruption. There was no major flare. The geomagnetic KP index, which measures planetary-scale magnetic disturbance, was well below storm threshold throughout the relevant window. Whatever you think of the Marcatelli framework in general, it is irrelevant to this specific eruption because the driving conditions were not present. The synchronized ring of fire claim is the weakest of the major alternative theories, and yet it is the one that gets the most traction online because it pattern matches with what people instinctively want to believe about volcanic activity. The basic claim is that volcanoes around the Pacific Rim are somehow communicating that the timing of eruptions reflects some kind of coordinated awakening of the entire system. The serious version of this claim, the version that has actual research behind it, applies to earthquakes, not volcanoes. There is good scientific support for the idea that subduction zone strain transfer can synchronize seismic activity along long arc segments. The 1905 Bolnay-Tsetserleg doublet in Mongolia is one example. The 2004 Sumatra-Andaman aftershock sequence is another. But the volcanic version of this claim is much weaker. There is no documented physical mechanism by which Mayon's eruption is communicating with Hawaii's eruption, or with Indonesia's eruption, or with any other volcano on the Ring of Fire in real time. The pattern that observers see, dozens of volcanoes active simultaneously around the Pacific, is real. There are dozens of active volcanoes on the Ring of Fire at any given moment, by sheer statistics. But the inference that they are coordinated is not supported by the data. I will give you one alternative angle that does hold up, and you almost never hear it discussed. There is a real argument that Spanish colonial and post-colonial scientific framings of Mayon systematically dismissed local indigenous knowledge of eruption precursors that had been observed for centuries. Folklore in the Baikal region encodes a great deal of practical hazard knowledge. The mountain has names in pre-Spanish languages that describe specific behaviors. There is a real historical pattern of colonial authorities ignoring indigenous warnings, sometimes with deadly consequences. The 1814 Kagsawa eruption happened in a context where local hazard knowledge had been actively suppressed by Spanish ecclesiastical authority for 2 centuries. So when you see content online claiming that there is hidden knowledge about Mayon, the version of that claim that is actually true is not about ancient aliens or secret government cover-ups. It is about colonial-era erasure of indigenous expertise. That part is real. That part is documented. And it is one of the few alternative angles around this volcano that survives careful scrutiny. So, with the conspiracies handled, we have one more hazard to address. Because while everyone is watching the lava and the pyroclastic flows, there is something else building on those slopes. Something that does not even need the volcano to keep erupting in order to kill people. And it is going to start the moment the rain returns. Imagine the slopes of Mayon Volcano right now. Imagine 4 months of accumulated lava deposits, ash, pumice, and broken volcanic rock sitting loosely on those 40-degree slopes, in those gullies, all the way down to the foothills. Hundreds of millions of cubic meters of fresh debris. Most of it is small, most of it is loose. Most of it has been deposited by a steady stream of small pyroclastic flows and rockfalls over the past 4 months, and a much larger pyroclastic flow on May 2nd. Now imagine what happens when the rain starts. The Philippines is one of the wettest countries on Earth. The Baikal region, where Mayon sits, gets between 2,000 and 3,000 millimeters of rainfall per year. That is up to about 120 inches. Annual typhoon season, the period when tropical cyclones routinely sweep across the Philippines, is approaching. May, June, and July are the ramp-up months. By August, full typhoon season is in effect, and every typhoon, every tropical storm, every prolonged heavy rainfall event dumps enormous quantities of water onto the Baikal region, much of it onto the slopes of Mayon Volcano. When that rain hits the loose volcanic debris on the slopes, the debris does not stay where it is. It mobilizes. It mixes with the water. It flows. The resulting fluid is called a lahar, which is an Indonesian word that volcanologists adopted decades ago because there is no English equivalent. A lahar is a volcanic mud flow. It has the consistency of wet concrete. It moves fast, sometimes as fast as a pyroclastic flow, although usually slower. It travels down the same gullies that the pyroclastic flows used, but it can extend much further. It can reach valley floors. It can reach populated areas that are well outside the 6-kilometer permanent danger zone, and it carries everything in front of it. Cars, trees, houses, bridges, people. The most catastrophic recent example of this is Mount Pinatubo, the same 1991 Volcanic Explosivity Index 6 eruption I mentioned earlier. Pinatubo's eruption itself killed about 850 people. Bad, but contained. The lahars that followed the eruption, that started during the rainy season immediately after and continued for years, killed several thousand more. The lahars destroyed entire towns. They rendered hundreds of square miles of agricultural land unusable for over a decade. They turned the Pampanga River basin into something resembling a Martian floodplain. The eruption was the dramatic event. The lahars were the long, slow disaster that came afterward and refused to stop. Mayon is now armed for lahars. The slopes have been loaded with 4 months of fresh volcanic debris. The gullies are full. The drainage systems are choked with material that was not there in November. And the rainy season is coming. The first heavy rainfall on those slopes will mobilize material. Even if the volcano stops erupting tomorrow, the lahar risk persists for years. Philippine lists lahars and heavy rain as one of the active hazards in their May 3rd advisory for exactly this reason. So here is the picture you should hold in your head about Mayon right now. There are at least 3 different time horizons of danger, all running at the same time. There is the immediate hazard, which is whatever the volcano is producing this week. Pyroclastic flows, ash, lava, strombolian explosions. That hazard is geographically constrained to roughly the 6-kilometer danger zone, plus the 3 southwestern municipalities downwind of the active gullies. There is the medium-term hazard, which is what the volcano produces if the cycle escalates further. That hazard is harder to bound. It depends on whether the eruption climbs to a volcanic explosivity index 4 or beyond, or stalls where it is. And then there is the long-term hazard, the lahars, which will activate the moment the rain comes, and which will continue activating for years, even if the volcano has gone completely silent by then. Which brings us back to the question I raised at the very beginning of this video. The question that the local monitoring agency, PVolcs, the agency with the most experience watching this exact volcano, cannot answer with confidence. Is the May 2nd paroxysm the peak of this cycle, or is it the prelude to something much larger? I am going to give you the 3 honest interpretations that the data actually supports. And then I am going to tell you which one I think is right. And then I am going to give you the warning that gives this video its title. There are 3 serious interpretations of what is happening at Mayon Volcano right now, and the data does not yet resolve which one is correct. The first interpretation is that this is a normal cycle, slightly longer than usual. Mayon has produced multi-month eruption cycles before. The most recent comparable example was 2018, when an extended episode included pyroclastic activity and significant ashfall, but did not climax in a major explosive event. Under this reading, the 2026 cycle is just a more energetic version of what Mayon does sometimes. The May 2nd paroxysm is the cycle peak, not a precursor. PVolcs holds the alert level at 3 for a few more weeks, and then steps it down. The 5,000 evacuees go home. The lahars cause some property damage during the next typhoon season, but the worst of it is past. Historical base rates favor this interpretation. It is the most likely outcome. The second interpretation is that this is a precursor sequence. The escalation curve, the slope collapse mechanism, the sustained pyroclastic flow production, and the absence of de-escalation despite 4 months of activity are all consistent with a buildup to a volcanic explosivity index 4 or larger event. Under this reading, the May 2nd paroxysm is the signal that the upper edifice is becoming unstable, and a much larger collapse-driven eruption is plausible within weeks to months. The 1814 Kagsawa eruption is the historical analog. This interpretation is supported by mechanism. It is supported by trend. It is not supported by base rate, because most volcanic unrest does not climax in a major event. But it is the interpretation that the actual physics of the situation, looked at honestly, is most consistent with right now. The third interpretation is the long-tail outlier. A volcanic explosivity index 5 or higher event from Mayon is geologically possible, but historically unprecedented. Mayon has never done this in the recorded period. The probability is low. It is not 0. It cannot be 0. The mechanism would require a previously unidentified large magma reservoir to drive a true Plinian eruption. Under this reading, the 2026 cycle is the opening phase of an event that the historical Mayon record does not contain. Short-term probability, very low. Consequence, if realized, regional civilizational impact in the Philippines, plus a measurable global signal. I cannot tell you which interpretation is right. Neither can the experts at PhilCS, which is why they are keeping the alert level at 3 and refusing to commit to either a wind down or an escalation. The honest answer, the answer I would give a friend if a friend asked me what to think about this volcano, is that interpretation B is more plausible than A, given the current data, and A is more plausible than B, given the base rates, and C cannot be ruled out, but should not be expected. The next 2 to 4 weeks of monitoring data will tell. The 5,000 people in Albé's evacuation centers right now are not a precaution against something that might happen. They are the acknowledgement that the experts who watch this volcano cannot, today, tell you which trajectory it is on. That uncertainty is the warning. Mayon has erupted approximately 60 times in 410 years. One of those eruptions buried a town and contributed to a global cooling event the following year. The 2026 cycle is the longest sustained magmatic eruption Mayon has produced in living memory. As of May 2nd, it is no longer producing only lava. It is producing pyroclastic density currents from collapsing summit material. It is escalating. Whether it stops here or keeps climbing, we will know only after it happens. So here is the warning. The warning is not that everyone should panic. The warning is not that you should buy supplies or hide under your bed. The warning is that the pattern we are watching right now on this specific volcano in this specific country is the same pattern that has, in this volcano's history, preceded events that killed people at scale. Mayon is the most active volcano in the Philippines. The Philippines sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, which contains roughly 3/4 of the world's active volcanoes. The volcanic catastrophes that have come out of this region in the modern era have perturbed the climate of the entire Earth more than once. 1814 at Mayon, 1815 at Tambora, 1883 at Krakatau, 1991 at Pinatubo. Each of those was a once-in-a-generation event, but together they are not rare. They are part of the rhythm of this region. The May 2nd eruption is small by Mayon's historical standards. It killed nobody. It stayed inside the danger zone. The system worked. The evacuations were ordered. The monitoring agency held the line. By every immediate metric, this was a success story, a near miss handled correctly. But that is not what makes it a warning. What makes it a warning is what comes next. What makes it a warning is that the curve is still climbing. What makes it a warning is that on a volcano that already has the bell tower of Kagsawa standing in its shadow as a permanent monument to what can happen here, the conditions on the upper cone today are the same kind of conditions that, in 1814, ended a town. You are watching, in real time, the kind of pattern that the historical record tells us we should pay attention to. Most of the time, patterns like this go nowhere. They peak, they wind down. The volcano calms, the cycle ends, most of the time. But every once in a great while, this exact mountain, in this exact place, with this exact architecture, produces something that the world remembers for 200 years. Whether the May 2nd paroxysm is just another small step on a long, slow Mayon cycle, or whether it is the first warning shot of something the historical record has not yet seen, depends on what the volcano does in the next few weeks. I will be watching. The 5,000 people in those evacuation centers will be watching. The Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology will be watching. And I think, after this video, you might want to be watching too. Because the bell tower at Kagsawa has been standing there for 212 years. It is the only thing left from a town that, on the morning of February 1st, 1814, was alive. The mountain that buried that town is the mountain that, this week, is doing the thing it does just before it gets bad. That is the warning. That is the whole warning. Thank you for watching.